Hello there, and welcome back to Boardroom Kiss Insights, a spin-off series from the main series of podcasts called Boardroom Insights. This is a range of series with me solo, focusing in on specific business issues, and they are shorter than the main series. Let me start this episode with a story. So a good friend of mine, a couple who had a difficult year, personal issues and so on, decided that they deserved a break. So they booked a hotel down the country somewhere in Ireland. This was a big deal for them because it had been a tough year and their anxieties had been at a high all year for particular reasons. And they really felt that they deserved this break. And it was a good spring time of the year where the weather was nice and they were all set for a nice, pleasant experience with nice walks and so on. And so looking forward to it. So they arrived to the hotel. And unfortunately, their first experience wasn't great. The receptionist couldn't find the booking. Now that's forgivable. These things happen. And I understand that. And they were just so looking forward to a good weekend that they just acknowledged that and it wasn't a big deal. So when the receptionist found the booking, they then discovered that the room wasn't ready, even though they were past the check-in time. The room wasn't ready for whatever reason. Now again, you might say on its own, not a big deal. You could easily send a couple off to the bar to have a coffee or a drink while they're waiting. So they did. But they weren't offered a drink. They were just told to go to the bar, pay for their own drink. They were in good form with the expectation and the hope of having a great weekend. They just stayed in that calm state, Hakuna Matata-like. When they got to the room, they settled in, and later that evening, they called for room service. They ordered their room service, and 1 hour later, they still hadn't received their order. They rang back down, and there was no record of the order. It had been completely forgotten. Now, you can imagine by now how they're feeling. The initial surprise of the first couple of hiccups turned to disappointment because they had built themselves up so much for this weekend. And then it turned to annoyance, a little bit of anger, because then having had a few experiences like that, every time that they went for another interaction with the same hotel, they were expecting something negative. They were waiting. Their expectation was that something would go wrong. And that's often what happens. When we have an experience, we're, as customers, willing to forgive our service provider if something isolated happens. But when a series of things happen, and I don't know what the number is, it changes with every single person, but when a series of things happen, what that does, it multiplies the anxiety, the feeling of negativity of us as customers towards the service provider. So now we start looking for things that might go wrong in order to justify that negative thought we have. That's what I want to talk about today. What I want to focus on is customer experience versus customer service. And what is the difference? Is there a difference between customer service and customer experience? And actually, does it really matter in today's world, fast-moving world? And does it matter in the world of B2B? Well, let's find out. So what is customer service? Well, when you ask people to give you their interpretation of customer service, you'll often get examples of, well, it was the telephone call took too long to be answered, or the guy never called back, or I was waiting too long in the queue, or whatever. And they are all absolutely good examples of customer service. And they're all isolated examples in their own right. But my belief is that customer experience is much more holistic than that. It's the overall experience that we feel and the memory we have of the encounter. It's a combination of all of the touch points that we have with our customer. Whether that's B2C, by the way, the example I gave earlier in the hotel, B2C, but that can also apply in the world of B2B. Don't think for a second that you're off the hook. It absolutely applies to the B2B world also. But for us leaders, we need to have some form of structure because, like I said, when you ask a team of people in a workshop, as I have done many times, to define customer service, they will often give the examples that I've just given you. But I believe We as leaders need to be more structured than that. If we're trying to get consistency at every touch point, we need frameworks, we need tools so that we can communicate and train our people. So let me introduce you to one that I've been using for 30 years, and it has never failed to apply to any organization that I've worked in, from banking to retail to hospitality, even to the oil and gas industry, which is, of course, B2B. So let's just go through what do we mean by the three-legged stool. Well, you know the analogy. A three-legged stool has three legs. It will fall over if any one of those legs is missing. My belief is that customers judge us as service providers on three legs. And those three legs are product, place, and people. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, I want you to imagine that if you and I went to a restaurant this evening and we were greeted at the door by a very, very welcoming maitre d', waiter, call them whatever you like. And that person has great eye contact, really well groomed and smiling and friendly. They bring us to the table, they tell us what the specials are for the day, etc. Now, in your mind's eye, wouldn't you just tick the box under people because you've had a good experience? Good. Then I want you to imagine that the meal arrives on time, beautifully presented, and when you taste it, it's fresh, it's hot, it's interesting. Again, in your mind's eye, you would tick the box. And then here, now I'm going to exaggerate to make my point. I want you to imagine that the environment, in other words, the place, is not what you expected. Maybe the music is too loud. Maybe the lights are too bright. Maybe the room is cold. Maybe the toilets are a bit stinky. Maybe there's no hot water to wash your hands. Now think about that. What's your overall experience now going to be judged by? It's going to be judged by the most negative part, which is place. Even though this particular restaurant did well on people and did well on product, you're going to make a negative judgment based on the place. And here's the challenge for us as organizations. How do we ensure that we're delivering on all three at every single time, day in, day out, at every touch point? The thing is, people don't wear badges to say what's most important to them. So therefore, we have to assume that all three are important. Do the three legs equal each other in terms of weight and impact? No, they don't. But how do you know? How do you know which one is more important for which customer? The reality is you don't. So the challenge for us as operators, as service providers, is to deliver the best we can be on every leg of the stool, product, people, and place, every single time. Now that three-legged stool, let me tell you, I have used it with people like Harrods, who are five-star luxury retail department store, all the way across to Primark, Pennies, who are a high street fast fashion type store. The three-legged stool applies to both. How can it apply to both? Well, of course, the examples of what good looks like will differ from one to the other. So when we talk about product as one example, well, the product range in Harrods will be very different to the product range in Primark. That's okay. That doesn't mean there's anything wrong with Primark. That's their brand positioning. The challenge is for you to be very clear on your brand DNA in the first place, which is step one in my 7 steps to profit. But here we are now at the proposition stage and customer stage is steps 5 and 6. And that's around understanding what does good look like for your particular brand. Whether you're Harrods, whether you're Primark, whether you're somewhere in the middle, you've got to define what does good look like. And the thing is, you can use the three-legged stool as a checklist. Under product, there are lots of obvious questions like, what are the best products that we can sell? What price ranges? What colors? What sizes? Etc. What pack sizes? Whatever. There are many questions that you can ask yourself and to just think about what is that checklist, and then you can get the right answers depending on your brand positioning. The second thing then, of course, is place. Place is route to market. If you're a hotel, a restaurant, or a retail store, well, that's obvious then. It's a physical building. And all that goes with that physical building in terms of making it true to your brand. But if you're a B2B business, place means route to market. And that's how you service if you're a delivery company, for example, how you deliver and your scheduling to your customers, or indeed your online presence is also part of place and your route to market. You see, the thing is, I believe the world has changed in recent years. The days of differentiating yourself on product alone are gone. Unless you have developed a brand new product that you're the only one in the marketplace, or you've developed the best thing since sliced pan or the cure for cancer, the likelihood is you will not be able to differentiate on product. Because we're living in a world of fast-moving, globalization, where now your product is visible and your competitors' products are visible all around the world. Technology enables speed to market and speed to copying. Technology, globalization, and competition are just exploding. So if you think you can differentiate on product alone, I want to challenge you on that. Even the banks have learned this lesson. There might have been a time, early days, when they were trying to differentiate on product. That's their staple product within a banking portfolio of products. And you'll often hear banks advertising on TV about our mortgage has bells and whistles versus another company's mortgage which is blue and purple, whatever. But more and more organizations like banks, and indeed you, have got to recognize that that is now a Me Too example. That when others can copy your product features and benefits, that's not enough. So where do you find the differentiation? The differentiation, therefore, has to be potentially in people and place. Of course, there are things you can do in product. Of course, there are. I'm not ruling it out completely, but what I'm ruling it out in isolation, that you cannot just use product only. My challenge to you is to broaden your sense of differentiation and look for other ways to differentiate. What are the added value things that you can bring to the table? Let's take a high street department store on Oxford Street in London. Let's take Selfridges. Now, Selfridges sell Le Creuset saucepans. So imagine a 16 centimeter saucepan in the Le Creuset range that Selfridges have. But that same saucepan is available in John Lewis and other department stores. So why would customers go to Selfridges to buy that saucepan and not go to John Lewis? It has to be something else, because the prices are the same in both, let me tell you. They are exactly the same. So how come then customers will go to the Selfridges as well? Because Selfridges will give a broader experience beyond just fulfilling the product need. So my challenge to you is to recognize that this is where you will differentiate. It's got to be in customer experience. The three-legged stool is a great tool. It's a framework for you communicating your expectations to the front line. Because if you just make sweeping statements to your people, oh, we've got to be great in customer service, what does that mean? That just is too vague and it's just too open. We need to be specific. And the three-legged stool is a framework that's going to help you to do that. I describe all this in my first book called Premium is the New Black, and it really does resonate with everybody that I speak to over the 30 years. Let me give you a couple of examples. I'm going to stop here and just check my notes. Okay, back now to case studies. Let me give you a couple of examples. Let me start with the world of B2B. And I'm going to tell you about a client called LC Packaging. LC Packaging is a supplier and manufacturer indeed, headquartered in Rotterdam in the Netherlands. They have offices all over Europe and they specialize in packaging. And I'm talking about packaging here for onions, for tomatoes, for potatoes and cement. And you couldn't get a more commoditized product if you tried. So they're a very successful company. They've been around now, I think it's for 3 generations. And they're quite good at what they do. They really do give a great service. But let me tell you about some of the stories behind that. Because they are the size they are, and they're in a commoditized business, they've got huge competitors. These are global players on the world stage who have very deep pockets and do billions of turnover. And their model is to cut price. So the competitors manage to sell the basic commodity of onion bags and so on at lower prices. LC Packaging were challenged with this, as you would expect, but still they were able to compete. And here's something as an example. So we looked at this in more detail and we thought about their customers. The customers of LC Packaging are farmers. Now, farmers are quite good merchants and they're always very focused on price. Now, naturally, therefore, LC Packaging were having challenges with the big guys who could sell packaging at lower prices, but there was a little catch. So when we explored it and dug down behind it, we got to learn that we asked farmers, look, what is it that makes you decide to buy from one supplier over the other? And of course, they said price. Well, sure, of course they would say price. But then we asked the second question and said, right, well, apart from price, what else is important to you? Now, here's where it got really interesting. A farmer, his harvest or her harvest is dependent on the weather. So the weather determines if they got a great supply or an undersupply. This large global provider of packaging, however, because they're so sophisticated, they need forecasts. So they were going to the farmers and saying, we need your forecast for the year ahead. Now, how can a farmer forecast the weather? They can't. And consequently, they were either forecasting too high and buying too much product that they didn't need and were carrying over to the following year, or they were buying too little and then left short and having to scurry around the market and get replacement or fill in their needs at a higher price. So when we landed on that particular point, we said, aha, there's an opportunity. LC Packaging are a family company. They're not short of cash. They have great stocks. They were able to make promises to the customer that we will supply you with what you need when you need it. So regardless of the harvest, regardless of the weather, what you need, we'll have it when you need it. And here's the interesting thing. The customers were prepared to pay a slight premium for that. So even though the big global guys were coming in at lower prices, LC Packaging were able to sell in to some customers, key customers, at a slightly higher price. Now, I'm not saying at a mad higher price. I'm saying at a slightly higher price. They were able to get a premium. And that to me is recognizing customer experience beyond just the obvious things of product and price. Customer experience is a new battleground. So let me give you another example. So Selfridges, that amazing department store headquartered in Oxford Street in London with stores in Manchester and Birmingham. I was very privileged to work with them for quite a number of years, and as part of my brief, I was asked and asked to help them develop a whole customer experience approach. It was when we landed at the beginning, after the owners at that time bought the business and I was brought in as an external consultant. We did some mystery shopping and we identified that the experience on the shop floor was not as it should be for a 5-star department store selling luxury product. We went on a massive spree around developing a customer experience ethos around the store, which was always framed by the 3-legged stool. So the product, they were already brilliant at product. The buyers in Selfridges were fantastic at sourcing the best products out there and really editing and getting the mix right. The people and the place. The place, Selfridges is known for that amazing theatre and environment. You can feel the atmosphere coming out of the walls. It's quite electric. And that sense of ambience and experience and activity and theatre and merchandising and shop fits really raised the game for that second leg of the stool. And then, of course, for the third leg of the stool, being people, there was constant training, constant retraining of the people on the shop floor to get them to really understand and embrace connecting with customers in a very, very positive, proactive way. Consulting with customers in a needs-based way, not just selling them product, but selling them solutions to what their needs were. And of course, concluding every transaction with a smile and a really good feeling so that the customer left feeling very, very positive about their experience. And that was an amazing success story, and so much so that Selfridges kept winning the award for the most successful retailer in the world. Let me give you a third example. And this one I'm going to turn it into a negative because it is a negative, but to hide the guilty, I'm going to give the company a false name. And that false name is Great Taste Distributors. Let's call them GTD for short. GTD is a distributor of beverages to clubs, pubs, hotels, restaurants around the Midlands of UK. Let me say again, it's a false, fake news story, but just go along with me here. One of the key things that these guys have to consider is stock availability. They've got lots of competitors. So they're selling water, they're selling cola, they're selling spirits and so on to their customers, but they have lots of competitors. And the competitors will eat their lunch just like that anytime. And there's not much loyalty with these particular customers. But my client, GTD, we're seeing their sales and margin falling. So when we dug in behind it, we did some research, asked customers how they're feeling, what was going on and so on. And one of the principal things that we heard back was out of stocks. GTD would take an order, the representative would call into the pub on a given day of a given week, take an order for whatever was needed. And because the order was taken and not disputed by the sales representative, the customer would understandably assume, well, they're going to get delivery. Fair assumption, right? But then what would happen is the rep would submit their order back to base, and then at base, they may be out of stock of a particular item. They don't tell anybody. The first thing the customer gets to hear about it is when the delivery arrives on, let's say, a Friday. And on that Friday, the delivery arrives minus the mixer-sized bottles of Coca-Cola. Now, you imagine how a pub will feel at that stage, that they were so dependent and expectant that they were going to get their Coca-Cola because they ordered it and nobody disputed it. And now here they are now with no Coca-Cola mixers for the weekend. Now, can you imagine how that escalates and how that can disrupt loyalty and goodwill with customers, between customers and GTD? This is a very real issue. So the example that I gave you may be bonkers to you in your business, but take it as a serious example. These things happen. And unless you know for sure what the micro things are that are going on in your business at an operational level that might be impacting your customers. That example I gave you is a product issue and an availability issue. But your issues could be place related. Your issues could be product related. They could be people related. And my challenge to you is be sure you know for sure, first of all, what good looks like. That will then influence your customers' expectations of you. Back to my Primark hard example, you don't go into Primark expecting to see Chanel and Gucci, do you? So however you shape your brand, that sets expectations with your customers. But make sure you follow through in those expectations, whether it be at a basic level or at a higher level. Your customers are judging you on all three elements all the time. You don't know for sure which ones are more important to them. Maybe you could find out by asking them, but when you don't, you've got to assume they're judging you on all three. I want to pause for a second and check my notes. Okay. Back here now again. So let me finish off on the Great Taste Distributors issue, because when this was identified as an issue with customers, we then naturally did a causal factor analysis and went behind what was causing this out of stocks issue. And guess what? It was the system. The system behind the scenes just wasn't working. Somehow they're producing statistics to prove that they were at 98% success with deliveries. But the way they were measuring them was not, they were measuring them based on after the item was struck off the order because it's out of stock, then what was left in the warehouse, they were delivering that to 98 or 99% success. Well, that's not a fair measure. That's not a true measure. That's hiding the fact that there's stuff going on behind the scenes. What we found in this particular organization was silo mentality. The order department was an order department of 6 or 7 people that they worked in isolation. They worked well with the salespeople, but they didn't follow through on giving the sales representative or the customers feedback on their order. The orders were then sent over to the warehouse, and the warehouse then was dependent on its supply from production. Now you think about it, if all of those different departments are working in isolation, in silos and not together, that's where things fall down. This is a real example I'm telling you with GTD, but you can take it for yourself that the likelihood or the possibility is that there are similar things going on in your organization. And the larger the organization, the more complex it becomes. But don't be blinded by the fact that it happens in organizations. It could also be happening in yours. Make sure you, like I said, set the standard and make sure then that you're delivering on that standard. Because internal service has got to play a part here, which of course is driven by culture. And here we are again talking about culture, which is step 2 in my 7 steps to profit. But that drives everything. Why is it step 2? Because the other steps above are influenced, enabled, and impacted positively or negatively by culture. So I'm going to finish by saying to you, customer experience is the new battleground for every business. And I'd also say to you that premium is the new black. Because the expectation is that customer service, customer experience, we've got to do better. We've got to keep doing better. Because if customers, or rather, if your competitors are not able to differentiate on product alone, they're also going to do what I'm telling you to do, which is look for other ways to differentiate. So all of that just rises the tide, and the tide rises all boats. Unless you're also looking at your proposition and looking for ways how you can add value to differentiate, you're going to get left behind. All of that hugely impacts on sales, and all of that hugely impacts on sustainable profitability. I'm going to finish by reminding you about our 7+ Index tool, which is a great organization health assessment. It's one way of getting under the hood of your issues in your organization, particularly around customer experience. Yes, it does measure that too. So have a look at 7plusindex.com. Reach out to us. We'd love to talk to you. We'd love to help you at the very minimum level on helping you to do an organization health assessment. But of course, we'd really love to work with you on improving your customer experience proposition right across the board, from outside and inside. That's it from me. Have a great day. Thank you. Bye-bye.